thank you for joining us today. Hope you are all well. My name is Ivan Kozaliev, and I'm a city specialist working at Chaos Group. And I'm very excited to share with you my workflow today. First, I want to start with something brand new. It's the V-Ray collections. The V-Ray collection is really nice, and with the release of V-Ray 5 for 3ds Max, we're introducing a new offering, which is called V-Ray collection. The V-Ray collection will give the users access to a number of products and services in the Chaos Group portfolio without the need for multiple licenses. Just one license for infinity possibilities. Here we can see what is included in V-Ray collection, and as you can see, you can really easily switch between different softwares. You can use the V-Ray scans materials, which are the most realistic scanned materials on the planet. Also, you can create really nice simulation like fire or water and things like that. And after that, you can use the Project Lavina, which is something really nice, and I will talk about in the next slides. Also, you can render your images with Chaos Cloud. About Project Lavina, it's a really interesting software because with Project Lavina, you can have a real-life ray tracing example, a real-time ray tracing. Project Lavina is now available, and once you create your project in SketchUp, for example, you can just export a VR scene and drag and drop it into Lavina. And after that, you can have a really nice results. Okay, as you can see, Lavina is something extraordinary because it can handle extreme amount of geometry and render it really fast. Also, you can navigate into your scene, walk around, take the stairs, and see everything in a really nice way. Here we can see how we can export the VR scene. So once you're ready, you can just drag and drop the scene into Lavina, and you can end up with a real-time ray tracing experience. It supports animation, you can move the sun, you can change the sun, you can change the lighting with HDRI image, and you can rotate it. Also, you can switch materials. You can just drag and drop different skies, as you can see right here, and you can explore really fast your project and the space. Another good thing is that you can move around objects and hide them or unhide them. Also, you can set a focus distance, which can enhance the impact of your project. It's intuitive, so you can just go and take the stairs, go to the next floor, explore the space from the inside, and that can be achieved really easy and really fast. So if you want to try Project Lavina, you can just download the beta version. Okay, so now let's go and see the topic we're going to discuss today. So today I'm going to break down an architectural visualization project to different aspects of the work in order to show you how to take advantage of V-Ray Next features. I'm going to talk about architecture, visualization software, and about art. Because V-Ray is not just a visualization render engine. V-Ray actually helps you to represent your designs into the best possible way. Thanks to many improvements in V-Ray Next for SketchUp, now it's easier than ever before to create stunning images. If I have to describe it, probably I would just use 3 words. It's faster, smarter, and more powerful. Here we can see some of the features that can enhance your images. They're separated to 3 categories. In the first column, you can see some workflow optimizations that can boost your workflow and speed up the way you are working with V-Ray. As I mentioned, very smarter. Now, thanks to new intelligent algorithms, V-Ray can help you to choose the right settings for your images automatically. And of course, V-Ray is faster. Thanks to new performance optimization, it's faster than ever before. Let me show you how I've taken advantage of these features to create this project. First, let's see some of the images. This is the sunset shot, that is the morning shot, and here we can see the night shot. During the next 1 hour, I will guide you through different aspects of the work, technical and artistic ones, from the composition to the materials and the lighting. But first, one really interesting question: to be a technician or to be an artist? In order to create something beautiful, we must be both. We should be creative as an artist, but also to possess some technical skills in order to express our vision and to make it visible for the other people. During the years, V-Ray has become an industry standard and helped many artists to visualize their ideas in the best possible way. The visualizations are not just about the lighting and the materials, but also about the mood and the feeling we want to have in the image. For that reason, the first thing to consider is the location. How the location contributes to the architecture, the materials, the lighting, and how they interact. I wanted to create a Scandinavian house, and in order to achieve that, I had to explore the region. Starting with the environment, I have gathered different real-life references. The climate right here is tough, and the landscape is full of rocks, vegetation, lakes, and mountains. Also, the lighting is different from the lighting in the Mediterranean, for example. Here the light is soft, producing soft shadows and peaceful atmosphere. The climate contributes to the architecture as well. Something common for that region is the black color on the facades. One of the reasons for that is because the cold climate and the lack of day lighting. Just like in V-Ray, the black color will absorb the light, which will make the building more energy efficient. And here we can see the initial sketches based on the idea and the research. And it was really easy, thanks to SketchUp and V-Ray, to end up with image like that one. So let's jump into the project. The first thing right here was to create the model. As I mentioned, thanks to SketchUp, that was really easy. Unfortunately, very often we have the right materials and lighting, but the image is still not realistic. In most cases, the reason is the geometry. Now, I will show you for what I am careful when it comes to the geometry. First is the proportion between the objects. That is really easy when we have ready blueprints. We want to avoid the disbalance in the size between the objects in the project and their proportion. Second, we need details as much as possible. The detail will give us an extra realism and more life. And next thing that is really interesting. I'm sure that all of you are wondering what is that image right here. Actually, this is a shaving blade looked through a microscope. If we take a closer look, we will see that even here there is no sharp edges. In the real life, we don't have any sharp corners. But why that is so important for the visualizations? Because the smooth corners will catch highlights, and those highlights will drastically increase the realism in the image. Unfortunately, it will be a daunting process if we start to change our project and make the corners smooth in the geometry. So later on, I'll show you another tip how to achieve that without touching the geometry. And let's start with the geometry for the environment. When it comes to environment, we have few challenges that we want to fix. The first one is the poly count, because we want to have a really heavy geometry for the trees, for example, in order to be realistic. But at the same time, we don't want to make the project too heavy. Another thing that we want is to scatter all those trees or stones really fast, and we need a variation. We're using different models right here from the warehouse and some asset providers. But imagine that we have a forest. with thousands of trees, and we want those trees to be high detailed with a lot of detail. If we just use a pure geometry, it will be really difficult for us. Actually, we're not going to be able to rotate the viewport or to model something with that project. Thanks to V-Ray, we have another technique that can help us, and it can allows us to use a really high detailed models and at the same time to be able to work with that file. It's called V-Ray proxy. Basically, the V-Ray proxy is a dynamic geometry which will be loaded into project at render time only. So you can imagine you can think about that like you have a placeholder in the project, but the actual geometry will be saved on your hard drive. So while you are working with SketchUp, you will not have any issues. And when you hit the render button, V-Ray will grab all of that geometry from your hard drive and it will be rendered. We have different preview types. The first one that you can see right here is the full geometry preview, which I'm not going to use. The second one is a simplified mesh, and that simplified mesh will just indicate where is the geometry, in that case the tree, and it will give a brief information about the size. But when you hit the render button, you end up with a really nice tree. And we have other options like the box preview or even a point. Here we can see some of the previews. And here we can see the simplified mesh in the upper part of the image and the rendered proxy on the lower part. As you can see, the mesh is simplified. It's really simple, but when you hit the render button, you can end up with a really nice geometry. Another really good thing right here is that in V-Ray Next, we can save proxies with the materials. That can be really handy because once we create the proxy and add the materials, as you can see right here, we don't have materials, but when we click on the proxy, we can see that we have material swaps. We can choose to use just the colors if the object is really far away from the camera, or if it's close, we can drag and drop materials into the tree. And once we are ready with the tree, we can save it to a custom library, which can be really helpful because if we save a lot of trees into a custom library, we can reuse them later on, and the materials will be preserved. Here we can see how we can add a custom library. After that, we just need to drag and drop the object we want and place it into the scene. And when we hit the render button, all the materials will be preserved. Okay, and few more tools. We have standalone tool, which can be really helpful. And you can render just with the standalone tool, which I'm not using very often, but in some cases is really helpful. Also, V-Ray Mesh Viewer, which can be helpful as well, because if we have a lot of proxies and we are not sure which one we want to load, we can just drag and drop them into that tool, and we can explore how they look like and what is the geometry, and it can be really handy. Also, there is another tool called Apply to V-Ray Mesh. With Apply to V-Ray Mesh, we can convert OBJ files to proxy, and after that, we can just use them in SketchUp. Okay, so now we know how we can how we can fix the issue with the geometry, the challenge with the geometry. If we want a really high detail geometry, we can just use the proxy. And now it's time to scatter all those trees in our project. And after that, to randomize them. You can just use the scatter plugin, which is really useful But currently I'm showing you another option. The first plugin I'm using is called Ray Tracer by TomTom, and it's really helpful because you can scatter really fast thousands of trees or stones into your scene. And the second one is called CAOS Scale and Rotate Multiple by Chris Fulmer, which can randomize them with few clicks. Okay, let's see the first plugin. It's called Ray Tracer, and with the spray can, we can really easy and fast scatter all the trees around the mountain. It's a good idea to prepare the proxy before that and to set the preview type to box. After that, really easy and fast, we can have all that geometry into our scene. But as you can see right here, they're absolutely the same. And in the real life, we don't have two trees which are absolutely the same. So we have to randomize them to make some variation between the different trees. In that case, we're using the second plugin, and with that plugin, we can randomize them by scale and rotation, and each tree will be scaled and rotate into different value. And here is the result. Of course, if we want to have even more variety or diversity, we can just use two types of trees and scatter them, or we can just choose different materials and apply different materials to different groups of trees. Now it's time for the grass. Probably it will be really difficult for us to scatter the grass manually or with that plugin, because the grass has a lot of strands, and if we scatter all those strands, even with that plugin, it will be daunting. Of course, with V-Ray, we have solution for that, which is really simple and really nice. It's called V-Ray Fur. The V-Ray Fur is again dynamic geometry, specific V-Ray geometry, which will be generated at render time only. We have a lot of settings for the grass, as you can see right here, and we can just change the density or the length, the thickness, the gravity, and many more. I want to mention to say something. With V-Ray, V-Ray actually is versatile. If you're a beginner, you can just use the sliders right here and don't think about anything else. Of course, if you are a really advanced user, you can have the freedom to use different maps and textures in the slots for the density or for the length. And in that way, you can achieve a huge diversity of the grass. Okay, and another thing that I want to say is something really important. It's artistic ones, and it can destroy your image since the beginning, or it can enhance the final results since the beginning. It's the composition. So let's see a few slides. I will pay special attention right here because for me that is something really important. The first thing that I want to mention for the composition is the geometry. Very often, the geometry can suggest us what kind of composition we can use. As we can see right here on the upper left image, we have some symmetry, so it's a good idea to use the symmetry composition. On the second image, we can see that we have some repetition, so it will be a good idea to use that approach for the composition. Another very important thing is the framing. Here we can see a really famous photography by Arnold Newman, and the image on the war image is considered as a masterpiece, but we can explore and make some research right here. On the upper images, we can see the initial photography without the cropping, and we can see that we have a lot of details which are not necessary, and it will distract the attention of the viewer. But after the cropping, we can see that we have only the important objects right here, the artist and the piano. And the piano guide our attention to the to the artist, and it is a guideline. Speaking about guidelines, we should talk about the focal point. The focal point in fine arts is the area in the image which demands the most attention, and the guidelines in the image will lead our attention to that point. As we can see on the upper left image, the shadows and the light are pointing our attention directly to the objects we want to emphasize, the group of people. Another thing that can help us in the composition and in the image is the contrast. And with the contrast, we can achieve a really peaceful image with low contrast, peaceful and calm atmosphere. But if we want to have dynamic or some kind of tension in our image, we can just use the high contrast image. Also, we can stay with the bright colors or with the low key colors, but usually probably we will stick to the full scale image with the full scale contrast and colors. And here we can see some examples created by Edgar Payne for landscaping composition, which is really nice because he is exploring different composition scenarios for landscaping. So I will advise you to find that book. It's really interesting. I like it a lot. And the color is one of the most obvious elements of the composition. You can use the color in your image to grab the attention on some specific area or to change the mood, for example. Here we can see some different approaches of the color usage in the image. For example, with the swimmer is wearing some clothes with really warm colors, which are in contrast with the surrounding, which is some blue color of the water, of course. And thus, the author is catching our attention thanks to that contrast. And some paintings right here created by the famous painter called Claude Monet. Those two paintings are considered as the masterpieces. But when I try to make them black and white, obviously, at least for me, the result is not the same. So the color vibrance is something really important that can help us to achieve our idea, to improve the image, or to help us achieve some different mood. I'm showing you that because the visualization art is a combination between many different arts from the real life. And probably the closest art will be the photography. And just like in the real life, in the photography, if we want to take the best shots of our project, we will need a really good camera. Thanks to V-Ray, we have a lot of options to control the camera. Now we have exposure value control and automatic exposure and white balance, just like in the real life. If you want to take a picture with your cell phone, probably you just need to point the phone and click the button. Without thinking about the exposure or the white balance, now with V-Ray, you can have that. You can have automatic exposure and white balance. Also, if you want to gather the attention on some specific part of the image, you can use the depth of field and everything else will be blurred. Also, we have level of expertise. Just like I mentioned earlier, V-Ray is versatile, so if you're a beginner, you can just click the automatic exposure and white balance. Or if you want to take the deeper or the more complex settings like the film sensitivity or the aperture or the shutter speed, you can still do that. So let's see the different shots one by one and analyze their composition created with the camera. For the main shot, I'm using the golden triangle composition rule, which is really famous and works really well in that case. As I mentioned, the geometry in our scene can suggest us what kind of composition we can use. And with those swapped rules, we can just use the diagonals and use the golden triangle rule. Here we can see some guidelines, and it's a really good way to make your composition more precise. So basically, the attention of the viewer should be lit by the main diagonal in the image. But I wanted to catch the attention on the house. So the thing that I did was to catch some golden reflection on the facade, because we are making a sunset right here. And the reflection can help us to catch the attention from that diagonal and to stay on the building. For the night shot and the morning shot, I'm using another very famous composition rule. It's called golden ratio, and it worked really well. Right here, I'm using another object. It's the lamp, because it can give a really nice detail, which can bring a human presence in the image, and I really like it. Also, something really nice right here is that we have a really bold colors. The environment is bringing some cold colors, while the house is lit with artificial light, which can bring some warm feelings in the image, and it can be really helpful. And here is the morning shot. Since I'm talking about the artificial lighting and the blue colors of the environment, maybe it's time to talk about the lighting. The lighting is maybe the most interesting part in the visualizations for many artists. The light defines the architectural space, and it's key factor for providing information and impressions. As you can see right here, we have absolutely the same geometry. It's a real life photo, but we can see that with different lighting, we can achieve totally different mood here as well. Absolutely the same place, but with different lighting, and we have totally different moods. So let's see all of the shots one by one and explore the lighting. For the sunset shot, I'm using V-Ray and dome light. Basically, the image-based lighting is something really useful, and it can produce a really nice lighting. It's a combination between HDRI image and the dome light. The HDRI image is high dynamic range image, and when we apply that image to the dome light, basically V-Ray will wrap with a huge sphere our image, our project, and it will emit light based on the high dynamic image. That can provide us with a really nice lighting into the image based on a real life scenario. When I set the lighting first, I'm overwriting everything with a gray color. In that case, I will not overwrite the color on the facade, because I want to catch the golden reflections right here. And probably the glass will not be overwritten as well. As you can see, the glass and the facade material are not overwritten, and everything else is overridden with a gray color. Thus, I will not be distracted from many colors, textures, and unnecessary details. Here we can see the dome white with the HDRI image. The thing that I like with the HDRI images is that with one image, one HDRI image, we can achieve totally different moods just by rotating the dome. And if I rotate once again the dome white, we can catch the golden reflections on the facade, and we can achieve the idea. After that, I will add the sun white, because I want slightly sharper shadows right here. I'm very careful with the sun because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't want really sharp shadows, but this will increase slightly the contrast. Okay, for the night shot, I'm using again dome white with artificial white. The dome white is a blue HDRI image, which will create the blue feeling in our image. And after that, I will create two spherical lamps, one for the interior and one for the lamp in the garden, and they will bring warm colors in contrast of the environment. Probably you are wondering why the left part is overexposed, but keep in mind that the facade is really dark, and uh, when we disable the override function, we will have a really nice core. And when it comes to the facade and the planks, maybe it's time to cover the topic for the materials. So right here, I'm using different approaches for the materials. First, I'm using materials from the library, which is great. And I'm trying to use as much as possible materials directly from the library because they're ready to use and I just need to drag and drop them. Also, for custom materials, I'm using custom library, just like with the proxy at the beginning. And I have some custom materials in the scene. So let's start. First is the material library. In V-Ray, a really nice material library, we can use a really nice material library with more than 600 ready-to-use materials, which are suitable for architects and interior designers as well. We have different categories right here, like concrete, bricks, car paint, fabrics, ground, leather, liquid, metal, and many more. We just need to drag and drop the materials we want, and after that to apply them on the objects. They will be applied only for V-Ray. So this is something really nice, and you don't have to use time to create materials from the scratch. You can just use the materials from the library. Of course, if you want to create materials from the scratch, something really custom, you can just create the material, save it into a library, and after that, reuse it. With the custom library, we can set materials really fast, and we don't have to create materials from the scratch each time. For example, if you like materials from some of your colleagues, you can just ask him to save the materials, and after that you can use them. Or if you're using almost the same materials for different projects, you can just save those materials into a library, and after that reuse them with your next projects. And as I mentioned at the beginning about the sharp edges, you can use edge texture in the bump slot, which will automatically round up your corners at render time only. So you are not going to touch the actual geometry, and when you're making blueprints, you have the sharp edges, but when you click the render button, you end up with those really nice highlights. Let's see the custom materials. For the water, I wanted to create some peaceful water with really slight waves, right? Just like on the reference right here. So I've drag and drop some water material from the library, which you can see on the right side of the image. But as you can see, the water is too bumpy, the waves are too strong. And the thing that I did right here to achieve the peaceful effect was just to reduce the bump amount. So when you drag and drop material from the library, you can expand the asset editor to the right, and you can see that we have a lot of settings and properties right here, and we can change that material really fast. Another custom material is the concrete, and the interesting part with the concrete was to create that dirt places around the corners. For that purpose, I've decided to create a custom material, and in the diffuse slot, I'm using a texture with dirt I'm using another texture for the reflection and another one for the bump. Here we can see the three textures. We have the diffuse texture, which is basically the core. We have the reflect and the bump textures, which are in black and white, and they will produce the bump and the reflections, which will be really nice. And for the diffuse, as I mentioned, we have a texture, but it's placed in dirt texture. So let's see the dirt texture. We have unoccluded core and occluded core. For the occluded core, I'm just using the black core. And for the unoccluded core, I'm using the diffuse texture. So we can mix them with the radius. And as you can see, around the edges, we have some really dark places. And basically, the black core will be combined with the diffuse texture. Another material, the wood planks, they're really simple material, custom again, with three textures: diffuse, reflect, and bump. But as you can see, the diffuse is really bright. And for that project, I wanted to create dark wood. We can really easily change that. We can just open the Photoshop or other image editor and make it darker. But in that case, I've did something else. Okay, in the advanced options, we can see all of our textures with a slider. When it's set to 1 or to the maximum, we have just the texture. But when we decrease the slider, we'll mix the texture with a black core. And right here, I'm just decreasing the slider and I'm mixing my bright texture of the wood with a black core. So I'm making it darker really fast. And one more advanced or complex material. Of course, if you don't want to make complex material, you can just drag and drop materials from the library. They're ready to use, but I want to show you that you can create custom materials and a more complex workflow. So for the grass, I'm using two materials. The first one is for the ground, because the ground is something with different material from the grass. So for the ground, I'm using one material, and for the strands, I'm using another one. Let's see first the ground material. The ground material is combination between two diffuse textures. Basically, it's a blend material. Here we can see the two diffuses, diffuse A and diffuse B, and I'm mixing them with noise, which will make some diversity or variety of the material. Here we can see that when we mix both of the texture, we have some different areas with the grass for the ground. And for the grass, when we have strands, usually the strands have a really small thickness. It's relatively small, almost zero, just like the leaves right here. And in that case, usually in the real life, the light is going through that surface. It's just like a sheet of paper. The light will go through that material. So we have some translucency. For that purpose, I'm using V-Ray two-sided material. V-Ray two-sided material is material specifically designed for objects with relatively small thickness, just like the leaves, the strands of the grass, or sheet of paper. Let's take a closer look at that material. For that material, we need front material and back material. We can use only the front material, and thus V-Ray will use the front material for back material as well. And we have translucency. If the translucency is set to absolutely white, we will have maximum translucency for the material. And if we decrease that translucency to 0, to black core, we will not have any translucency. So I'm leaving the translucency by default, which is something average, and it works well for that case. And for the front material, I'm using the material of the ground. Okay, and here is the grass. And in order to make some depth of the image, I'm using something else, something really useful for exteriors, because right now, if you take a closer look, or if you just look through the windows in your room, you see that the objects which are really far away from you, for example, mountain or some skyline, you notice that they're disappearing in the space. So when they're really far away from you, their colors will blend with the color of the background and they will lose some of their contrast. That effect is called aerial perspective. If we start the interactive rendering right here, we can see that we don't have any depth in our image and the mountain has the same contrast as the objects which are really close to the camera. But when we enable the volumetric environment, specifically the aerial perspective right here, we can notice that we have some depth. And with a few tweaks for the visibility range and the atmosphere height, we can set really fast the aerial perspective and add depth to our image, which can help us to achieve more realistic images. And for the morning shot and the night shot, I'm using environment fog, which is something really nice and useful, especially if we want to create some different mood from the rest of the images we can see. Again, we just need to add the volumetric environment. As you can see at the beginning, we don't have some feeling about the depth, but when we enable the volumetric environment and the environment fog, we can see that we have a really nice effect right here, which can help us to achieve some depth in the image. And if we increase the distance and the height, we can end up with a really nice silhouettes for the trees in the background. Keep in mind that using the fog, probably it will slow down the rendering speed because the fog is something that is tough for calculation. Talking about the rendering, let's see some options about the rendering. The first thing I want to say is that with V-Ray, you can have actually two different render engines. We have CPU and GPU. The CPU is the central processing unit and the GPU is the graphic card. Basically, if you have a really strong CPU, you can choose to render with your CPU, or if you have a really expensive and nice graphic card, you can choose to render with your graphic card. And right now I have a really strong graphic card, so I'm going to use the graphic card. And I'm going to use something really nice, which is called NVIDIA AI Denoiser. With the NVIDIA AI Denoiser, we can have a really fast preview of our image. Basically, the NVIDIA Denoiser is based on artificial intelligence algorithms, which can estimate really fast how the image should look like after the rendering is finished. It's really useful when it comes to look development, when we tweak the materials or the lighting, and we can have a sense how the image should look like after the rendering is finished. But for the final render, I will advise you to use the V-Ray denoiser because the V-Ray denoiser is more precise and it will gives you better results. Another thing that can enhance the speed is the swarm, especially if we combine the V-Ray denoiser with the swarm. Basically, V-Ray swarm is distributed rendering, and if we enable the swarm, we can utilize all of the machines at the office. So if we have 10 machines or 15 machines, we can just utilize their power and render our images really fast. But if you don't have a lot of machines at the office, or you're a freelancer, you can just use the Chaos Cloud. It's a brand new service, and it's really suitable, especially for freelancers, because if you have a lot of projects right now and you don't want to invest in render farm, which can be really expensive, you can use that service and it will save you a lot of money. It's a one-click solution. You just need to click on the cloud button and you will be sent on the V-Ray on the Chaos Cloud platform. You can change the name, the resolution, or the output type and upload the project right there. The good thing right here is that you can see in real time how your render is preparing. So if you think that something is not correct, you can stop at any point the render. So you can see the progress, and when it's ready, you can just download the image. And when we are ready with the images, usually the thing that we're going to do is to save the image, open it with image editor, for example, Photoshop or GIMP or something else, and make some color corrections right there. But in the most cases, that is not necessary, because in V-Ray Frame Buffer, we have a lot of options to change the appearance of the image. We can change the exposure, make it darker or brighter. Also, we can decrease the highlight burns. We can increase the contrast, change the white balance, the hue, the saturation, the color balance, the levels curve, and many more. Directly in V-Ray. And something that is relatively new. Currently, we support RTX graphic cards, which is something really nice. Basically, the RTX graphic cards are new technology, new graphic cards created by NVIDIA, and they're meant for ray tracing, which means that you can render faster with these graphic cards. And I will show you one example from interior, how faster is the RTX compared to the regular graphic card. Okay, so let's summarize the information from today. First, V-Ray is versatile, and if you're a beginner, you can take advantage of a lot of ready-to-use options, like the automatic exposure or automatic white balance, or you can just drag and drop materials from the library, which contains more than 600 ready-to-use materials. Also, you can just render your images with the interactive rendering really fast. You have options to control the camera, basic options, and at the same time, if you're advanced user, you can take advantage of a lot of properties and settings in V-Ray, which can give you full freedom to visualize everything you want. So my advice is just to be creative and let V-Ray handle the rest.